Hello, we're coming to you from Microsoft Silicon Valley campus, and I'm joined today by John Thompson. John is chairman of Microsoft's board of directors. John, welcome. It's great
Thank
to
you
have
very much. Nice to be here.
John, you've got over 40 years of tech experience in companies that range from Symantec to IBM to Virtual Instruments. Tell us about the genesis of this. What drew you to the tech industry?
Well, I really had no interest in technology. I really wanted to be a lawyer. And ironically enough, a fraternity brother of mine was the head of outplacement services at my undergraduate school, Florida A&M. And he suggested that I interview with IBM because I had been a salesman and IBM was on campus looking for salespeople. And lo and behold, they offered me a job. I accepted it thinking that I would do it for 2 years. And almost 28 years later, I left IBM and joined Symantec. And then from there, I tried to retire and failed retirement and ran a little startup called Virtual Instruments for about 6 years. So it's been a remarkable, remarkable experience and a great opportunity for me and for my family.
How does your background fit with or maybe complement the other members of Microsoft's board?
Well, I think we have a very diverse board, not just in terms of ethnicity and gender, but also in terms of experiences. We have someone as profound, if you will, as Chuck Noski, who leads our audit committee, who's been at AT&T, was the CFO at Bank of America. We have Charlie Scharf, who recently joined the board, who's the CEO of Visa. We have someone like Padma Warrior, who's spent 30 plus years in the tech industry, and someone like Sandy Peterson, who ironically enough was on the D&B board, which is very much a technology services company, and is the chairman at J&J, a business that has long investment cycles and long revenue streams associated with the products that they produce. So there's a diverse set of experiences around the boardroom table, and hopefully the management team and investors at Microsoft think we complement each other.
John, tell us, how were you invited to first serve on Microsoft's board of directors?
I announced in November of 2008 that I was stepping down as the CEO of Symantec. And within a matter of weeks, I got a call from a guy who was leading the governance and nominating committee at the time, a guy by the name of Jim Cash. Jim said, "Gee, John, we'd like for you to consider joining the Microsoft board." And I said, "Well, you may not think of Symantec as a competitor, but we think of you as a competitor, so I'm not sure it's appropriate since I'm going to be the chairman for a while." And so he says, "Well, how long?" I said, "Well, probably a year." He says, "I'll call you back." And sure enough, 1 year later, he called back, and I had to explain to him that I decided to stay another year. And he says, "Another year?" He says, "I'll call you back in 6 months." Well, sure enough, 6 months later, the heat got turned up a little bit, and then Steve Ballmer called and says, "Let's get together for dinner." And so Steve and I had a wonderful discussion about where the company was and where he was trying to go or take the company. And as it turns out, I became fascinated because I thought that there were some parallels or similarities, quite frankly, into the state of Microsoft at that moment and the experience that I had had at IBM back in the early 90s. And so I said, yes, I'll do it, but I need to have a little bit of a gap between my time at Symantec and joining the Microsoft board. So I finally joined the board in the early spring of 2012, I think it was. And it's been a delightful experience, really, really great experience.
John, you've been both a shareholder and a director at a number of public companies. What aspects of your experience as an investor and a major shareholder are most complementary to serving on Microsoft's board?
Well, I think it's important for any director to recognize that his or her role is all about representing the shareholders in the boardroom, but doing it in a way that's complementary and supportive of the management team. And having been the CEO of a public company, having served on 4 or 5 or 6 public company boards, I think I have some sense of how that balance works. Sometimes it can be challenging, particularly when the management team wants to go in a direction that may be different than what shareholders expect. But I think that's the role of the board, to try to balance, if you will, that set of issues where shareholders may have one perspective and management team might have another. One of the important parts of my role as chairman is to have an outreach to our investors to make sure that we have an unfettered view of what they're thinking about what we're doing. And so I spend a fair amount of time listening to shareholders, more time listening than talking, quite frankly.
Let me follow up on that, John. As chairman, a somewhat unique role, different role than some of the board members. What are some of those unique responsibilities that only a chairman would have?
Well, first off, it's as much about organizing the content of our board meetings and making sure that we've heard the voices of all of the board members in terms of the topics that we're going to discuss. It's also a bit of a liaison role between the management team and the board, because I spend a fair amount of time with Sasha and other members of the management team on topics that either come up during the board meeting or come up between sessions, if you will. And then finally, I spend a fair amount of time more broadly with investors. And so I will 2 or 3 times a year go to conferences to participate in those conferences or meet with investors.
You joined the board just prior to the start of Microsoft's significant transformation. How do you view this current leadership structure?
Well, I couldn't be more pleased with the work and progress that Sasha and the team have made. Candidly, when I joined the board, as I referenced earlier, I thought that there were some parallels between where Microsoft was and where IBM was in the late or early 1990s. And my view was that given the experience I had there, perhaps I could help in some small way. I never would have anticipated, quite frankly, that we would make a CEO transition when we did. I never would have anticipated that I would have become lead independent director within 6 months and then chairman of the board within, 9, 12 months after that. But one of the more fascinating, candidly, professional experiences in my entire career has been the involvement with Microsoft and the search process to identify and appoint Satya as the new CEO here. It has been quite the challenge, but by the same token, I think the shareholders have been well rewarded for their support of him and his focus on getting the company to adopt a mobile-first, cloud-first strategy. That simple statement has been very, very profound because it's allowed the team to rally around the few things that are going to be relevant and important to change Microsoft as the industry changes around it.
What about the Microsoft culture? Have you seen that shift since Satya has taken over the role of CEO?
Well, let's not kid ourselves. Cultural change is not an easy thing and takes an enormous amount of time. And I think the changes that have occurred at Microsoft have been more about, candidly, the change in leadership and the attitude of the new leadership team. There's an attitude of humility, there's an attitude of openness, there's an attitude of listening more than talking. Those are elements that can, in fact, impact how customers, investors, employees, everyone thinks about the company, and over time influences profoundly the culture of the company.
Now, how has the board been involved in the strategic and execution aspects of Microsoft's transformation?
The strategy for a company belongs to the leadership team of the company. And I don't want to confuse my role or the board's role with that of the management team. And so Satya and the senior leadership team have clear responsibility for developing the strategy. Our role is to challenge that strategy in terms of whether or not it will produce the kinds of results and returns our shareholders expect. And when you look at what's going on in the industry, what is quite obvious at this point now is that there's a shift, a tectonic shift going on, where more and more compute is moving to the cloud. And so we have been very encouraging of Satya's strategy to migrate more and more of our capabilities to a cloud-based environment. But I think our balance point as a board is to understand the strategy, challenge its ability to deliver the expected returns that our shareholders have, but be supportive of the management team along the way to make sure that we provide the right encouragement and the right input, if you will, as the strategy is evolving.
Well, John, it's been a great honor. Thank you for joining us. It's John Thompson, Microsoft's chairman of the board of directors. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.